Check, check, check. Hello, hello. Okay. We got. We got 3 people in here. Let's give it a minute. Let's see who's. My God, I gotta get rid of this beard. I like the fact that somebody always gives it a thumbs up when they come in. Let me get this light right. I'm working with best over here, guys. All right, let's give it a couple more minutes and then we'll get into it. The slides for wow, the lights are growing up. The slides for this lectures are already up. It should be called the Islamic Republic. That's under files in the class's Canvas page. So you can go and follow through those with me. But there's not, I mean, yeah, I mean, it helps to have them on. You don't have to be staring at my face. Okay, 10 more seconds and then. I'm still getting used to doing this on cam. Okay, just, if you're not hearing my voice and stuff, I do sometimes, some people hit me up and say that the lecture's been, they get cut off sometimes. It's based on all of our connections. There's nothing I can do about it. And the school was supposed to give us Zoom, but we ended up not getting those. There's a freeze on the department's budget or something. I'm not very sure. So we can't use Zoom for as many people as we have. A lot of you have submitted all your work. There's do your best to go ahead and give me the rest of your work. Whoever hasn't submitted them, I will always grade them. Sometimes when students have emailed me and said, okay, for such and such reason, I couldn't submit it on time. I didn't even take any points off of those. So do reach out to me and submit them. You can all submit them all online. I grade them as they come in and put them on. Yeah, so I hope everyone's fine. For those of you who have are reading and gaming, that's all I've been doing. Pretty much unlocked every weapon on Modern Warfare by now. So I don't know how much longer this I can take, but nevertheless. Okay, so that is that. Feel free to stop me anytime. Whatever you chat, I'll pick up here. Questions about anything, let me know. So today we're just going to start with the Islamic Republic, and you can start with I didn't put numbers on these. Just the second slide. There's a total of 9 slides. Second slide, which is titled, What is this revolution? And I kind of wanted to mix, there's going to be a historical lecture here and a certain kind of meditations on the idea of revolution, which is kind of more of what I was studying and trained with, the intellectual history of it. I'm going to try to put these together in order to kind of raise some questions and introduce new ideas of thinking about the 1979 revolution. So we basically follow through the last lecture up until the eve of the revolution, really, when Shah is leaving, and a couple of days later, Khomeini's coming back from Paris. And you've guys seen those videos of the 2,500 year celebration, right? there's all these riots that I talk about, and all these like political figures that were involved, up until like how many people are in Azadi Square and all that. So I hope like watching those documentaries, and I'm gonna put more up. Not all of these are on par. Not all of these are like, they're not academic. They're people made. Nevertheless, if anything, it's good to see the footage of this, just to put a little visual understanding to these lectures. Yeah. So right. So there's this thing with this question that comes up within every revolution, really, that you talk about, because as the Slovenian philosopher Slavoj Žižek puts it, like, and then what, right? You have the revolution, and it's like, okay, great, you got rid of the old order to some extent, maybe even you literally killed or exiled some people, and you have new ideals that you need to um, uh, implement, right? But again, whose ideas are going to be implemented, right? Because there's this general public, different factions have different levels of support, but we still got to figure out who is in charge here and whose ideas are going to prevail. Now, because of this very question, some factions have to come together, and some factions have to be eliminated or pushed back in one form or another, right? So kind of, Iran is still going through this. There is this larger society that at many times sees itself against the state, right? And this is a general statement, but we've talked about, there are separatists in this country. There are tribal people in this country, or people that live in villages that are not really the benefactors of even having a state in this country. And there's a new intellectual class that has one needs or another. There's religious establishment. There are these different needs, and generally they have something in common, these factions or these interest groups, and that is this kind of prevailing unhappiness with this centralized, localized government that begins to emerge in Iran in 20th century, really. Some people started with the Safavids in the 18th, 17th century, but I don't really think up until what we see, none of them with Reza Shah, Mohammad Reza Shah, has ever existed in Iran. So that is kind of a general thing. So now all those people have to come together in one way or another and build this new country that has just overthrew its last dynasty. And one of the main kind of bonding kind of principle that brings all these groups together, other than being against a localized kind of government, is this prevailing foreign threat that are seen. And I talked about the cultural aspects of it, and you've definitely seen this, the material aspects of this, right? And what I mean, with the British being very active in Iran, right? Having Iran's oil, with the Russians, having always wanted to have an influence, with the Americans later on, right? And especially in this era. So there is this kind of always like this threat that people see with foreign involvement within the country, and that is material, right? Like it's regarding politics and economics and those questions. And then there's cultural, like what is happening to our way of life? What is happening to the Iranian identity? How do you remain authentic, right? The religious folks are asking this, the new kind of modern bourgeoisie is asking this, the left is asking this, a lot of people are asking this. Again, they don't have a common interest in the future, but they do see this outside threat within their life that is kind of becoming more and more real. So we have a question here: which faction, is your opinion, suffered greatest blowback from the revolution, barring the royalist. Yeah, so there and that's a good question, and maybe we can bring that up and then return back to it. I would say the the some of the it's kind of hard to there is like the liberal Muslim intellectuals of nationalism, of nationalist parties, right? The people who got behind Khomeini very early on. I mean, the left did too, very much at some point. I feel like they lost a lot because they were the faction that had the public support beforehand, as you saw with people like Mossadegh and people like him throughout these lectures. Then the nationalists kind of, and then I heard to use this kind of Islam because most of these people are Muslim one way or another. Even the Marxists are Muslim, right? But they're not Islamists, right? Like Khomeini, if you say. So we'll use that word to indicate dichotomies. Yeah, I think this new emerging intellectuals who are nationalists, who are already in government, had parliament seats. They kind of hated the Shah's government, but they weren't that huge on big into overthrowing of everything, right? And which a lot of institutions came to remain, like parliament and the even prime ministership. But by the time we get to 1981, those people are even rooted out, which people like the left and the kind of the left and the Islamists are kind of against, because they see them as kind of the liberal, middle of the road kind of people that are in the way of change or siding with the wrong groups, right? And then there are the right, or people who let the Islamists take power within this revolution, right? So I think those are the people that really lost a lot. First, their place in society, then their support, and a lot of them had to leave, right? Well, for the Islamists and the hardcore Marxist groups of different kind, they didn't have anything to begin with. I mean, they had popularity among certain segments of population, but they weren't that prevalent, you know, in the parliament, or with the kind of cosmopolitan population as much, right? There was sympathy for them, but they weren't that huge, so they didn't gain a lot. But again, while the Islamists came to on top, well, some of them, because some of their Islamist ideologies Khomeini wasn't really up for. Yeah, so a lot of this leftists also got kicked out of the country or executed later on. We'll see with this event that really kind of turns against them. My personal opinion, to bring short, I would say the nationalist, the kind of the Muslim in the Western education nationalists in the line of the National Front Party were the ones that lost, I think, most, and felt a lot of the blowback. So then there is the second point on the slide, going back to this, is like class-based versus kind of complete overthrow without definite aims, right? So this was kind of another characteristic of this revolution, that it wasn't class-based, right? We're talking about 70s. We're talking about the 20th centuries, where at least in articulation, this idea of antagonism between classes, those who do have, those who not have, that idea is not really existent. I mean, the idea of like Muzdasafin, right? That the oppressed exists, but it immediately takes this religious overtone, right? Even when it's articulated by the left, like this idea of kind of being not really class, but being oppressed by, and it's kind of sometimes it's hard to define who the oppressor is. Like, is it the colonial powers? Is it Shah as the extension of them? Is it the new existing bourgeoisie, right? Is it that have kind of royal connections, right? So this idea is like we're just going to fight against injustice, against the downtrodden, right? Against Zol, cruelty of the downtrodden. It's so that is kind of very different than this idea of like, look, there are classes in society, and some of them are kind of raking in more of the social benefit than the rest, even though it was the case, as we saw during the White Revolution. So that is an aspect of it. There is a emerging, I'm going to say, religious representation within the language of this revolution, which is kind of like Shiism mixed with mishmashes of leftist ideologies. Even through the words of Khomeini, we see this stuff, these articulated, but suddenly there's this idea of that. And mind you, these are not Sunnis, so there's the idea of caliphate is nothing that these Shia ulama who have studied in Qom and Najaf, then that's not something that would sound good to those folks. But nevertheless, you see this emerging idea, first time in history, of this idea that Shiism has something to do with governance, right? And we saw that in the book of Khomeini, Vilayat Faqih, right? This is something that never existed, right? And the people who, this is kind of weird. A lot of people who had criticized the Shia class in Iran for so long for being quietist, as in they would sit out the political debates. Because even at this time during the revolution, there are ulama who say, we got to get out of politics, right? And there is this Khomeini, and these people sometimes talk about, oh, we're going to have your government, and then we're going to just guide it to make sure that the will of the people who want religion in their government is kind of satisfied. You know what I mean? So we're also seeing that in this that new emergence in this revolution. Then there is this question of, and let's go to that last point first. Who does the revolution belong to? Which is a question I brought up first. And immediately in 1979, there is this very clear understanding that Khomeini is going to be the leader of this revolution. He's by far has the most of the support within the population, right? But who are going to be its guardians? It's going to be a question that has to be dealt with later on. And then the last question would be, what should be done with the Shah, who had just escaped, who is at this time is in the United States, and he's going to figure out very soon that he's not welcome there, which sends him to Egypt, but we get to that point later. So yeah, let's talk about this stuff. That picture that's Yasser Arafat, the leader of PLO, sitting there with Khomeini holding hands together. And it's weird, there are not that many pictures of Khomeini smiling, but that's one. And this picture, I love this picture because on the right side you have kind of Khomeini's crew, these people from Qom, and then on the left hand side you have this kind of PLO folks, right? These are the people that are associated with this group. And by this time, PLO has gone from kind of a militant group trying to transition into a political group. Right, so even though they're Sunni and their goal is to reclaim, their goal changes, the PLO, from year to year, but to, in a sense, reclaim the Palestinian lands, they do find an ally within Iran immediately, right? Because Shah always gave kind of talked about supporting the Palestinian cause, but he never kind of delivered. If anything, he was a bigger ally of Israel than them. And the Shias never really cared about that cause anyways, but in the 70s, it's starting to catch on within this anti-colonial ideologies. It wasn't actually rare for Israel to hire Shia militant groups to kind of do assassinations. Actually, this was something I learned very recently on this book that I've just finished, Rise and Kill First. Yeah, but nevertheless, there is this kind of, for the first time, there is this actually coalition that is happening between these different groups that are finding different causes. And then they see that the Iranian Revolution was a success. They see a friend in Iran, right? Um, so then there is this idea that so this revolution was good, but we have to kind of keep this revolution going. And one of them is that the liberal bourgeoisie, the people who like the nationalists, right, this intellectual nationalists that were had a kind of political presence in Iran, like, are those our friends or are those kind of more Western aligned people, right? Like, can we keep them? Right, that is one of the question. But this world of calling someone a liberal kinds of becomes a pejorative at this time, right? From all sides. It either means that you're too cowardly, or it means that you're too qabzadeh, like West intoxicated. It might also sometimes mean you're anti-religious, right? Like you want beliefs within the country that are not really aligned with the Iranian modes of being, right? Social being in Iran. These are all kind of weird critiques, but nevertheless, it does kind of catch on. Then there is this the Tachtis, like the Tachtis, Toghutis, sorry, not Tachtis. Then there's this question again, going back to this idea of what to do, what should we do with the Shah? Then there is to what to do with people who were in his camp during this year, right? So this is not like South Africa or this idea of truth and reconciliation, right? The kind of revolutionary movement happens, but you're like, hey, rather than going and like punish everyone, let's everyone come, talk to each other, and then we move on. Now, you can have your opinion about if truth and reconciliation was a something that worked, given today's problems in South Africa, right? Especially with the rise of. Okay, I'm not gonna go there, but it's kind of, nevertheless, it's an interesting thing to consider. But in Iran, it becomes that kind of question of punishing the past becomes a very kind of important question, especially within the religious class here. And the fate of the Talmud is like the throne, the royalists, like what should we do with the royalists? And royalist doesn't necessarily means people who are part of the court, right? But people who you saw or the society understood as being on the Shah side, right? And I'll get back to how this is decided. But then this other thing, again, that connects to a point from the previous slide is that this idea of who's loyal to the revolution, right? Again, what is this revolution? What are its many goals is a question. But again, this idea of asking who is loyal and can be trusted with the revolution becomes an important kind of a question within society at this point. Another point is that we need to establish an Islamic Republic. There's a referendum on it in 1979. 98% of the electorate say yes, even though this idea of Islamic Republic is like, it's strange, you know what I mean? Because nobody really knows what that means because it's never existed. And this continues to be a problem, this question of like, what is an Islamic Republic, right? You have presidents like Rafsanjani, right, talking about it in the 80s and 90s. Like, well, we didn't know what it was. We just constructed something out of, nothing and out of some beliefs that we have. Again, but nevertheless, there is a vote on it in March, and people seem to agree with it. So that's the question. So um, this slide is not. Let's go to the next slide. This slide is not about this one person. I just, like always, I'm taking an archetype and I'm going to kind of tell a story through it. Well, this person is kind of important. He's Hujjatul Islam Sadiq Khalkhali. A lot of people know him as Khalkhali, and what he's very known as is kind of the hanging judge of Iran for that time, for a long time. Um, Khalkhali kind of, and here he's destroying a statue here, a statue of a Shah at the Museum of Shah that was near a mosque here. Um, um, well, and let's put him to the side here. But yeah, so this idea that the history needs to be judged becomes kind of one of the fundamental beliefs of, regardless, Khomeini, who's kind of amassing a lot of support at this time. And he does even kind of develop, there is an army, right? There's a national army, but he kind of developed his own militia, right? Which are the Pastaran. And the Pastaran kind of become the foot soldiers of Khomeini. There is prime minister, and then we move to having a president. There's elections, but then there is this supreme leader thing that is nobody's voted for, and that supreme leader chooses the guardian council. We had a lecture about this when we were still in class, that decide who can be in the government and whatnot. Nevertheless, the supreme leader has his own militia. It is called the Pastaran. And then there's the Basij, which are more local militias that anyone can be a part of. Men and women, actually. Yeah. So at this time, there begins to be a series of kind of kangaroo courts, trials there, and there begins a series of mass executions of people who were either associated with the previous regime, like, for example, they were in a court, or maybe they were part of the Sabah, or they were considered to be part of different factions that were not loyal to the revolution. Right. So this is kind of the first one. Here's when kind of the leftists, because they're kind of vying for power here, they also start becoming marginalized. I'll talk about the kind of attack on the left later on in the Wednesday's lecture. But yeah, that is also happening. The charges, as always, is this idea of are you loyal to or not. But when you look at the court hearings here, the charges are almost always very religious in tone. This idea that not that you're against the revolution or you disagree with us and you have to die, but you're against the God and his rule in Iran, and you hate the prophet. And, nothing new about this. Like, at this point in history, you have seen this idea of a kangaroo court. So at this time, and I think I've talked about this again. This, like, I've said this so many times, you might just be like, okay, this has happened so many times in history. But this idea of like Kurdish or uprisings, or the existence of certain tribes that are not loyal to the Khomeini's government becomes a problem, right? For example, Khalkhali does go to Kurdistan, Iran, and they do kill a lot of Kurdish sectarian groups there, right? Or being the Turks on north. So that is also not allowed. So imagine, so now you're already seeing a faction, right? You've seen kind of against the left, the nationalists, but also the sectarians, right? Or the different kind of nationalist movements within Iran, right? Like the Kurds or the Turks, who wanted their own province, kind of autonomous provinces, right? Maybe not be their own country, and they're also put down. We have a couple of questions here. What was the methodology behind assassinating figures such as Roof Paso? Was it the fact that she was a proponent of feminism? Was it just the influence? Um, let me, yeah. So we have to. Let me do this. Let me. Um, in the case of Parsa, I will do a kind of another lecture here because this is one. This idea of assassinations is start to happen later on. But this idea of nobody is assassinated for being a feminist. People are assassinated at this time for having ideologies that are seen hostile to the nation at large, right? Because there are at this time when mass demonstrations by women, who I'll get to in a second, where, for example, hijab is becoming necessary. There are kind of how women come to streets, and then there's international support for them and whatnot. They are definitely harassed, and some of them are jailed, but no one is kind of assassinated for it. Well, I'll do a kind of a mini lecture on Parsa when we come around to that part, because it's something that needs to be addressed. I also put up a documentary about assassination of these groups, especially like Kurdish sectarians and whatnot in other countries, right? Because this something that is very much happening at this time, people assassinating people that have different interests in other countries, right? For example, Israel's doing it in France, the PLO is doing it in Germany, Iran starts doing it overseas too. There you go. There's this foreign terrorism idea. And then there is the development of Islamic State media, right? Which kind of starts having total control over how the revolution is seen, how the country is seen, and news becomes this part of kind of something that we struggle with in the United States at this time. This idea of like, should the news be part of the state, right, or the supporter of state, or should it have an independent existence? Khomeini himself, he talks about this. He does not believe that. There is a media, it tells truth, and it tells the truth of the government in power. And that's how he sees it, which is, all these are very interesting because a lot of these points are something that he had complained about, not 6 months before. And the last one I'm going to talk about, well, I'll talk about 2 points here, and then we kind of call it off here. One of the first thing that Khomeini does, his repeal of the 1967 protection of family protection, right? And it's later on, amendments are kind of added in the 70s. They're all repealed. The practice of hijab becomes mandatory. First, it's just government building and people who are working government, and later on is everyone. Now, for those of you who kind of been paying attention, what does this sound like to you? This is exactly what Reza Shah did in reverse, right? No hijab, and people have to wear kind of Western clothing, right? Now it's reversed. You know what I mean? At first, it was kind of government buildings and government jobs, and then the public, same thing, right? Yeah, so there is something worth talking about here, and you've definitely read this in your book in Sexual Politics in Iran, with this idea that, yes, this kind of repealing of these laws, which they're like this. That's why I really like that book I gave you. For example, there were a lot of women that are active on behalf of kind of Khomeini's ideology within Iran at this time, right? Well, none of those people could have been kind of pursued their public roles if it wasn't, for example, for the Shah to have given them divorce rights, to have letting women go to schools and be present in public and whatnot, which Khomeini doesn't ban, or the Islamic Republic doesn't ban, but they do put restrictions on it, right? But nevertheless, this is kind of the main characteristics of being a reactionary. But there is a side effect here of when this kind of hijab and these things become prevalent, and then there are kind of the Islamic Republic kind of spreads itself or brings within itself all these kind of aspects of society with its institutions and its ideology and its culture and the way to do this thing. Some people who would have not kind of sent their the women in their family to the public, or more traditional families, now did, because they were like, oh, we are kind of we are within a safe Islamic society, right? So that kind of blurs this idea between, home, the private sphere, safe, and the public outside sphere is like unsafe, right? So this has this kind of huge. With the Islamic Republic revolution comes this increase of women involvement within the government and larger public institutions, right? So that is kind of a weird aspects of it that need to be considered, because, as I always say to people, some people do like this Islamic Republic and the way it was going at the time, or it's going. They have criticism, but they also like it, and this was one of the parts of it. So we've gone, trying to not go long enough here. Yeah, we'll start talking about the Constitution later on, but I'm going to call it off here. Again, do submit your questions or whatever to me, and if you have finished your book, I know, I heard from some of your classmates that, some of you were kind of confused why I assigned that book. A lot of these questions about these finer points of societal change, right? And people's understanding of what is going on and how it's affecting their relations are captured in that book, which a lot of other books miss, right? So I really do encourage people to even go back and reread these chapters that are happening during the revolution, to kind of get a better sense of complexities of this era, right? For example, this kind of women question, this idea of like, there's mandatory hijab, a lot of people who hate it, but what are the benefits of it for those who do support it? Like these are kind of, they don't have quick answers. Yes, anyway, so do contact me, and I will see you guys on Wednesday at 4. All right, thank you so much, guys. Take care.